So I want to just take a moment and allow each panelist to introduce themselves, a little bit about them. You've heard from some of them, but just provide, just an intro, and then we want to, start off with some questions. We'll open it up to the community. Any questions that you have? So just go down the line. Paul. Intros, yes.
My name is Paul Quigley. I'm the CEO of a company called Block Lab Enterprises. We're an advisory group that does work in blockchain in healthcare. Some of the conversations we were having earlier around things like genomics and life sciences in healthcare. I'm a serial entrepreneur, have had one IPO, 2 private exits, and a great failure. And am also involved with this, Paul, with the Colorado Blockchain, the Governor's Council, and was also fortunate enough to be part of the Wyoming Blockchain Coalition, which is the group that started the 5 landmark bills that actually helped to define a utility token for Wyoming and now the country. Previous tours of duty with Accenture and Ernst & Young, and I'll leave it at that. Can answer any other questions afterwards.
My name is Paul Foley, also known as Paul number 2. I'm an angel investor in the space, and then we also started a project which would be a index fund of early stage tech companies that anyone can invest into. So it would be the first time non-accredited investors can potentially get involved in the early stage process in a fund mechanism as opposed to individual companies.
I'm Yev Muchnik. I'm apparently loud. I'm a corporate and securities attorney in the space out of my firm, which is called Launch Legal. I also run a co-working space for attorneys in the tech space called ESQLegal, part of Global Women in Blockchain, and just been in the space for about the last year.
Thomas Cox. I spoke earlier, and apparently my nickname is the godfather of blockchain governance, I found out. So I'm going to try to live up to that. Let's just say I have my fingerprints on most of the governance elements currently in use or planned for the EOS blockchain, and most of the mistakes are mine. So I have the scars to prove it. I'm looking forward to this panel.
I'm Aari Lotfipour, CEO and founder of Jalapeno Inventive. We're building a incentivized crypto education module or platform, essentially. So yeah, I'll go and get this started. We good on that, Brent? Oh,
one panelist. And this is Anna Taylor from EOS Tribe. She's overseeing V2 of the Constitution Telegram group and a couple other things. So just wanted to.
Hi, my name is Anna Taylor. I do communications for EOS Tribe. I also have a empowerwomen.io. It's a delegated proof of stake empower women proxy. It's more than just empowering women. It's just about challenging people to go the extra mile for women because the turnout of how many women are in blockchain is so small. But that gives a great opportunity for women to stand out. So behind that, what he had said with V2 is that Thomas is behind a V1, and a lot of the community helped write V1 of the Constitution, version 1. And it was written very, very well. And then in the middle of that, we had things come up like having to freeze things after the chain launched, and it created a lot of people wondering about how ECAF can help, and just kind of a little ruckus within the community that we're trying to figure out. And within that, B1 and Dan Lammer put out V2 of the Constitution, and so then everybody was like, what? Now we have options, and what does it mean? So I decided to start a V2 group, and because like in governance, you self-organize. And so we self-organized people that were interested in V2 to learn more, so we could have more sophisticated conversations about it. And along with that was the URI group, which is Universal Resource Inheritance. That's another group that I helped start. So we have Dan Lammer and the admins on those groups, so it's kind of fun to be able to hear what he thinks when people are kind of, going wayward in the conversation. But thank you.
finish up those questions. Well, all right. Well, we'll get this started then. We will start off with
Aari.
well, our first question.
Oh, you want to introduce yourself?
Oh, I did. Jalapeno event.
Sorry.
Very good. I can do it again.
No, go ahead.
All right. Whoa, that got loud. So we're seeing major steps by larger firms entering and announcing that they're entering this space. Legacy financial firms is what we're seeing now. What do you see as the steps and the hurdles making the connection between legacy legal and government institutions?
I mean, I guess kind of the biggest issue at play is enforcement and arbitration, right? So if something goes wrong, how do you have that kind of consensus built in, and how do you make it smooth in terms of governance, and how do people uphold it? So just the same thing as kind of the common issues that are going on right now. I guess I don't know if that's too vague or not, but really employing the traditional legal tactics that we use to enforce agreements into the blockchain space and making that bridge.
Yeah, there's a fairly lengthy and I thought very good paper written by Norton Rose Fulbright, the international law firm. The paper is called The Governed Blockchain. So if you look up Norton Rose Fulbright, we'll probably stick that in the show notes later, I guess. And there's a really good analysis. In fact, we relied on that analysis when we were building out the V1 Constitution. And they highlighted that we don't know, it is unsettled law how a legal contract in a Ricardian contract embedded in a smart contract that calls out to fairly standard arbitration, how that actually plays out. And so we've got a constitution that claims to be a multi-party contract, but does it get interpreted that way? And if it does, then contract law applies and UNCITRAL takes us home. And until that's happened a few times, and until other courts see that prior courts have said, oh yeah, that's totally cool, because courts are very conservative. They like everybody else to go first, and they don't like to stand out usually too much. Until we have, say, 5 or 10 really clear cases of it going through the way it was intended, this is very up in the air. We're in the chaos of unexplored territory.
To add to that too is like we're legally and financially there's deep roots, right, that are like centuries old roots. And to change their mind about how things work after having so many years of this is how it works, we've proven it works this way, why change it? I think the best way that we could get legal and government financial firms to start to look into using blockchain, streamlining that, is showing them how they can eliminate fees and how they can save money not having so many middlemen pushing paper that maybe, you know, if you were to do like a little check on their value in the company, they probably would be fired anyways. But I think what Thomas is saying is that we need a use case. We need a case that's, you know, for example, a good country, if people are going to be really charismatic, is to help Venezuela. So Venezuela is in a real crisis. But if a company like if a country like Venezuela was able to change and use a blockchain to save what's going on or change it, and then produce that, hey, this is actually feeless now, and we actually don't need as many people, and it self-executes, and there's less human error, then I think it just translates to dollar signs. You have to show that you're going to make more money using blockchain over time than what you're doing right now.
I think that there's also a dimension here, and this is probably one of the major reasons why corporations aren't adopting blockchain in a large scale, because to try to get through in-house counsel for any of these conversations is very, very tough. And so what they do is they like to contain their risk, and they would like to put the blockchain project on the edge. And so it doesn't affect core. And so from a governance perspective, it's outside of that. It's an experiment. That's why you're not seeing a lot of large corporations do blockchain work in their core systems. Not to mention the fact they can't scale right now. That's, but I think that when you actually look at supply chain, when we're doing work with life sciences clients, they want to do it on the edge so they can contain the risk. And they want to learn from it. The other issue we run into from a governance perspective is what data goes where and who controls it, who owns it, who's responsible for it. And so in the spaces I work, they're very heavily regulated industries, so they're very compliance focused, which is a little frustrating if you're an entrepreneur. But at the same time, that's, if you can get the use cases, it really helps a lot.
From the last night, who went to the Colorado Blockchain Town Hall? All right, a large majority. So one of the things that was talked about was a regulatory sandbox. So Paul, can you kind of elaborate? I think that might be a connection that you can lend insight to.
Sure. So one of the propositions for the council is a fintech sandbox. So the idea would be if you're an early stage company and you have around your 2 or 3 founders and you're looking to create an innovative solution, mostly related to payments, then you can get into this fintech sandbox, which would exempt you from any kind of license or registration for the early stages. So you'd have to have under a certain number of users and a certain amount of money transmitted. But the idea would be it's oversaw by the AG's office and exemptions to get off the ground until you're ready to launch your product to the market and have more users and handle more money or more value in your network. So that's something we're actively looking into. And then the other thing, the kind of precursor to that, is just setting up a point of contact in the government that would be able to quickly answer questions related to any type of, whether it's payment related or securities related questions for your project. So if you're doing an ICO, then it can give you guidance on the best way to do that. If you are building a company that might need a money transmitter license, then the Division of Finance and Banking can give you that answer and say how much they would cost, like $7,500. Right now, it's going down to $3,500 for a money transmitter license, but walk you through that application process as well. I think that is a huge step Colorado is taking that no other state that I've seen is really, other than Arizona, is really looking at, which is going to hopefully expedite the process to build a blockchain type company in the state. So this legislation session, no. The point of contact is going to be set up for sure. What we're actually going to do is Arizona released their fintech sandbox. So we have plans on monitoring that. So we've been putting touch with them to see how much demand there is for that. And also we started circulating surveys and almost a petition to see if there's companies in the state that are going to demand it. Passing legislation is hard, so you have to have a bona fide reason to do it. So we're actively looking at that now. If there are companies or you know of companies that would benefit from that, obviously send them that our way.
We're also watching Canada and the UK.
Yep.
All right, thank you guys. So humans have historically had a propensity to cave to corruption. Not everyone, but there's a notable amount of them that have. And we've seen it happen in the crypto space. We've seen it with multiple chains, not just things very, very recent, but we've seen it in the history of cryptocurrency. What can we do to combat these bad actors in this space as we're trying to develop these models? And I know they play their role in pointing out the problems, but how can we move forward with more progress there?
Enforcement. We have the tools in the EOS mainnet to combat corruption. We have the tools to demand greater transparency. We already have allegations of vote buying, vote selling, vote trading, things that are on the edges of legality or clearly outside the rule set of the Constitution. It is absolutely possible for any token holder of the EOS mainnet to file a dispute and say, I've been harmed by this vote buying, and bring a case. And the arbitrator who takes that case will have the power to issue subpoenas. And that arbitrator can even send a note to a court local to the subpoena target and say, please issue a bench subpoena for me for my case. And most courts will do that. And if the target of the subpoena, let's say some hypothetical exchange that was say hypothetically accused of selling votes, refused to honor the subpoena, which I imagine we all met, probably they would ignore it, the arbitrator is then allowed by the rules of dispute resolution to infer things from that refusal. So if you and I have a dispute, you get subpoenaed, you refuse to answer the subpoena, our arbitrator can now assume that the thing you didn't disclose probably favored me and can make decisions in the case based on that presumption. So that's why you got to be careful like blowing off subpoenas from arbitrators. We have an extensive time-tested tool set in arbitration waiting to be exercised. What we don't have is a community that is ready to grasp the responsibility of exercising this tool. This is it's like an infection that brings about an immune response. The immune response has not yet occurred. The body of the EOS mainnet has not yet reacted to the corruption with a counter-reaction of demanding accountability. The tools are there, but no one's using them. What I read on Telegram is a bunch of whiners saying, well, this isn't enforcing itself. Of course it doesn't flip and enforce itself. You have to use it. Please.
Can I ask you a question about that? So if there's arbitration, can arbitration be used for other cases, or is it only for that one case and it's not referenceable?
Referenceable, not tracking you.
Referenceable.
Well, remember that arbitrators are not bound by each other's precedent, but they are allowed to be informed by them. So we're not in a common law scenario. It's more of a civil law scenario. It's not like one arbitrator once decided a certain way, now all arbitrators are bound to follow that. No. Arbitrators are independent heard because there's no flipping governance in Bitcoin. There's no way to make a collective decision other than to yell at each other on Reddit. And even that doesn't work very well. Right? In Ethereum, this past summer, had a big governance get-together. I think it was in May. I was very excited because I thought I was going to learn all kinds of cool things about governance because the Ethereum guy's been doing this stuff for years. And the big takeaways from their big, 3-4 day governance retreat was that they were going to try to figure out who their stakeholders were and how to talk to them. Like, super. Send us a postcard when you get that one figured out. Yeah, there's tribalism, but it's tribalism primarily in places that are ungoverned and ungovernable by design. I mean, Bitcoin is like the cockroach, will last forever. It's a good, stable evolutionary design. Like, alligators have been around for millions of years unchanged. Bitcoin will be around for another million years, along with COBOL. Will be the two things that are alive today that'll be alive in a million years. I'm convinced of that. Yeah, we're going to have tribalism around Bitcoin forever because that's what Bitcoiners do because they can't do anything else.
Well,
you see unprecedented levels of cooperation among the more advanced blockchains that are less decentralized, admittedly, and have more formalized governance because there's mechanisms through which to cooperate.
So I think the other way to look at this is that when you have power control of stakeholders, that's really your fundamental question. How do you prevent stakeholders from amassing too much power so they can control the agenda, basically? Yeah, I think we need to do a better job at that. I think that right now the crypto tribe is actually very small. And I think there's some lessons to be learned. I think EOS may have an option on that, but I think there'll be other protocols that come out as well that adopt and learn. Because I think we're learning. I think that as easy as it is to villainize Bitcoin, I think it's probably equally important to recognize it was a starting point and we continue to evolve. And so if EOS is the next evolution of that, that's great. I'm expecting whatever the next protocol layer will be will actually be better than that. So I think that's what's going to happen. I think that we've got a long way to go, though, before we start to influence any substantial amount of the government. My thought.
Thank you, Paul. Next question, Jim.
So actually, I changed my question midstream from that last thing. So I'll start with one, which is, Gemini 1 didn't land a man on the moon. It took several. We had to launch monkeys. We had to do a lot of experiments. We had to fail. and even within the Apollo program, we had to fail many times before we actually landed on the moon. So I see governance and this evolution as in that context. I hope that maybe that's resonates, but I'll go to my original question, which is, we're using the term governance, and I'm wondering if there's what percentage of congruence there is with the way we've used governance, specifically within government and within corporations over the last 20 years. Is it the same or is it different?
Do not put the mic in front of the speaker. Do not put the mic in front of the speaker. So governance, in the generic sense, is collective decision making. And so government governance is making decisions in a government. And corporate governance is making decisions inside a corporation. And blockchain governance is making collective decisions in the context of a blockchain. They're all context-dependent statements. And so they differ based on where they are. And so they have funky, unique features based on that contextualization. They all share the same basic issue of a bunch of people who don't really understand each other fully and have different viewpoints and different fundamental interests, trying to sort of reach common agreement while actually getting their own unique personal needs met at other people's expense without being seen to do it. So that's the human condition right there. You know that every organism evolves for its environment, for the most salient aspects of its environment. The woolly mammoth, right, evolved for the Ice Age. Humanity's #1 environmental feature, the thing that we must be evolved to deal with, it's not the cold, it's not the wet, it's other people. The #1 force affecting the quality of your life is how other people treat you and how you get along with them. And governance is just one of the ways in which we interact with each other. And it's fairly formalized. It's got a little box around it because it's a fairly well-defined system. And the different flavors you mentioned, blockchain governance, corporate governance, government governance, private club governance, professional association governance, homeowners association governance. Don't go there. It's just flavors on that. And so we're all anthropologists and sociologists. We just don't know it.
So I think the other answer to your question is that everything you've just described is competitive. And I think that what's happening, the new ingredient is more collaborative. And you're seeing it through open source. You're seeing it through other activities where people are much more aware of resource constraints. And you're seeing it even in the press. You're seeing it about people looking at limited resources and the fact that we can't continue doing what we're doing in a competitive environment. We need to be collaborative and we need to cooperate. I think that's fundamentally the difference. And I think that we'll continue to have stakeholders who will take a competitive view. And I think that we need to think through, because I don't think we really know yet, how to create value in a cooperative dynamic. Right? We know how to do it competitively because I'm taking something from you. Right. And so I think that that's what's different, because I think that was your question. It's what's different. Now I think there's a recognition that we can't keep doing what we're doing, but that's not going to be an overnight change. We're not going to change corporations, in 90 days or even 5 years. We're not going to change stockholder expectations in 10 quarters. So
I wanted to add to the what you're talking about governance and everything, because he was mentioning how the typical governance, it's pit for pad against each other to keep people in line and stuff like that. But what I've noticed is that it's with EOS is like the early stages of Bitcoin and Ethereum. In the early days, people had really good feels and everyone was working really hard to make it work out together. And then once they got some dApps on the ground and some things deployed, then people decentralized and started doing their own thing. Well, what I've noticed within from my own personal experience with EOS before launch, is that a lot of people spent, close to a whole year of their life volunteering their time and all of their skills to build stuff that wasn't going to be built. And there's even things that we thought we were going to get and we didn't get it, and we had to build it. And what happened was that the community came together and worked like 12 to 18-hour days every single day or whatever, weekends, weekdays, and spent their own time to build things like that, and the people that had money to donate to build things. So we built like a community voting portal for free. The community raised money for it, but the people didn't accept the money because we needed it to elect BPs. And that was done days before we launched the chain. Another thing that we're working on right now, and I'm helping work on that, is the referendum platform. We didn't get a referendum platform, so we can't ratify our constitution. And because we weren't given the money, we didn't have a worker proposal for that, and blah, blah, blah. We had to do exactly what you're saying, is we had to come together and do it. And whether, for Eugene, like whether he's $500 an hour, he donated those hours to make it work, or whether somebody didn't do this, they could do this, and we all just figured out what we could do. I think that's the hope with digital nations, is that because from my personal experience, I'm having to translate my words to Mandarin and Korean on a daily basis to talk to people around the world. I never thought I would ever need to do that. But within that, what we're finding is that the commonality of us wanting to build this digital nation is put together a lot of people that are volunteering their time and skills to do it. And it's really hopeful. What will happen after we get the referendum and after a bunch of dApps come out, it might fall back to what happened with Bitcoin and Ethereum, where everyone kind of branched off into their own thing. But that one little beginning period, I think, is the hope for governments on a digital nation.
If anybody wants to take a deep dive into the science behind cooperation, I highly recommend the book by Matt Ridley, The Origins of Virtue. Origins of Virtue. It traces the history of the evolution of cooperation, not just among humans, but among animals. It's a very uplifting and, I think, optimistic scientific treatment of that phenomenon.
All right, well, thank you, panelists. We're out of time. We're at 3, right? Yeah. Thank you very, very much, and a round of applause for our panelists.